All right, welcome back. The title of this mini lecture is Colonial Latin America, Part 3. And we're going to talk about five terms, mostly related to the 18th century and the experiences that individuals across colonial Latin America had. Now, as you go to do your reading and learn more kind of about this time period, focus yourself in on these terms, really to help get a better sense of things. All right? So, first off, bourbon reforms. Now, by bourbon, we don't mean the drink bourbon. We're talking about the royal family coming partly from France that is taking over and informing, governmental institutions and administration of New Spain and colonial Latin America, largely in the 18th century. Now, the bourbon reforms varied, but they had a cumulative effect of course, causing widespread unrest, partly amongst the Criollos, the Spanish descent sort of individuals who are born in the Americas, these sort of wealthier individuals here, and then they're going to shift the tax burden down towards more working people, and this, along with kind of the lack of salutary neglect here, is going to cause some real unrest and opposition. This is true certainly in Mexico in the 1770s and 80s. And in other parts of the Americas as well. So the bourbon reforms are seen as this more, kind of efficient thing, the sort of enlightened absolutism, but of course, doesn't necessarily mean it's good for the average person there. Which brings us to our second point, which is the Enlightenment. So by the time we get to talking about the early 19th century, the early 1800s across Latin America, we'll be talking about a time period of revolution and about a time period of independence. And there's going to be a lot of factors that contribute to that. One of that is you got to change minds. And the 18th century is a time period in which the political understanding or political theory understanding of things like basic rights, concepts of democracy, really are being debated, certainly in the West, but internationally. And the Enlightenment really is the broad movement under which this is being facilitated. Now, there are three different phases to the Enlightenment. For our purposes, generally no. It begins in the early 1700s and it runs up till about 1799 or 1800. So this would be the ending period when Napoleon takes power. Now, what it does is it facilitates a discussion not only amongst elites, but amongst middle class or bourgeois sort of individuals, middle class people, about the nature of political rights for all. Now, the Enlightenment, of course, is not inclusion or diversity as we might see it in the 21st century. This isn't about perhaps equality before the law for everyone. This is really, something where more inclusion for, men regardless of property rights, right? This kind of thing, right? The ending of slavery isn't wholly on the table here, right? Sort of this kind of thing. Maybe a backlash against monarchies or the power of the church as it relates to state authority, right? This kind of stuff. The common thinkers or big individuals for the Enlightenment that we might focus on, again, they vary widely. So somebody like John Locke is certainly a prolific writer for this. Someone like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he's kind of separate. He kind of, operates in both the Enlightenment and then the later Romantic period. Cesar Beccaria, would be another sort of figure here. There's a lot of individuals to consider. And of course, the Enlightenment's going to have an effect in England. It's going to have an effect in France. It's going to have an effect in Spain, across Latin America, certainly, but also, British North America, and eventually working to kind of support the American Revolution as well. All right, this brings us to our third point, the 7 Years' War. Now, if you grew up in America and you read a bit about it, you may have learned that this was what was called the French and Indian War. Same thing. There's some fighting in Europe and fighting it. It's basically a global war. It's a world war. And it starts in the mid-1750s and it goes all the way up to 1761. There's a treaty or a peace that is reached in Paris in 1763 that brings the war to a close. Spain is involved, and the British, of course, are well aware of the wealth that is contained within some of these colonies across Latin America, and especially in the Caribbean, and they want in on it. So in 1762, the British storm and take Havana, eventually having to return, all that stuff.
but this kind of demonstrated the importance of Havana Harbor and its primacy as connected kind of the Atlantic world, and then the role of state power during the midst of this war, where by the time you get to the end of the war, it's pretty obvious that the British are kind of the leading actors, kind of amongst the European powers at the time. All right, number 4, the American Revolution. Right, so Latin America is going to be supportive. Some of its individuals are going to be supportive of the revolution, and you will see individuals, even partly from Spain, who are going to provide aid to the Americans here. Some of this has to do with, well, who is America trying to break away from? Who are who are the enemies here? And these kinds of allies of the moment and all of this. But there is a lot of fighting in and around Louisiana and modern New Orleans that's kind of connected to this. All right, number 5, the French Revolution. Now, the French Revolution begins in 1789. It ends in 1799. But of course, there were long-standing grievances that led to this outpouring of revolutionary activity beginning in 1789. And it follows a moderate to radical, reactionary, and eventually kind of dictator structure in terms of its revolutionary phases. And profoundly, the rhetoric to come out of the French Revolution is going to have a big effect on a number of classes, not only in Spain and Portugal, but across Latin America, and is really going to inform how many different communities think about and actuate their understanding of independence. Thanks so much.